Welcome back to our news bulletin. In Spain, the death toll from the new coronavirus has crossed 22,000 after the fatal disease killed another 440 people overnight. The US continues to be the virus epicenter, losing over 2,100 lives to the pandemic over the past 24 hours as the country's tally tops 47,000. The disease has killed over 183,000 people worldwide, with almost 2.6 million infected. Further details in this report.
Countries across the world are retreating on lockdown measures and forced to contain COVID-19. But there is fear that lifting movement restrictions too soon will lead to a spike in infections. In a dramatic shift of stance, the biggest decrier of lockdowns, US President Donald Trump criticized Georgia's decision to lift restrictions. Meanwhile, UN Chief Antonio Guterres has warned against the use of COVID-19 restrictions to peddle repressive authoritarian agendas.
Against the background of rising ethno-nationalism, populism, authoritarianism, and the pushback against human rights in some countries, the crisis can provide a pretext to adopt repressive measures for purposes unrelated to the pandemic. This is unacceptable. More than ever, governments must be transparent, responsive, and accountable.
Although China has reported no new COVID-19 deaths for 8 days in a row, the rising number of asymptomatic cases in the country remains a threat. In the UK, Foreign Minister Dominic Raab has warned that the second wave of coronavirus cases will pose an even greater risk. The government says full restrictions will remain in place for at least another 3 weeks and levels of social distancing for much longer.
We have to be very realistic that if people are hoping that it's suddenly going to move from where we are now in lockdown suddenly into everything's gone, that is a wholly unrealistic expectation. We're going to have to do a lot of things for really quite a long period of time.
Turkmenistan, one of the few nations in the world that has reported no cases of the coronavirus, has insisted its official data is true and it is not hiding anything.
Now, the President Donald Trump has signed an executive order to temporarily ban immigration to the U.S. At a news conference, Trump said the interim law will protect American workers during and after the coronavirus pandemic. The order will last for an initial 60 days, and then it will be reviewed for a possible extension. Critics accuse Trump administration of taking advantage of the pandemic crisis to implement an election promise ahead of the November 3rd presidential polls. But Trump insists the law only seeks to preserve and prioritize the healthcare and jobs.
In order to protect our great American workers, I've just signed an executive order temporarily suspending immigration into the United States. This will ensure that unemployed Americans of all backgrounds will be first in line for jobs as our economy reopens. Crucially, it will also preserve our healthcare resources for American patients. We have to take care of our patients. We have to take care of our great American workers.
Trump said a second immigration-focused order is under consideration. Now, in Pakistan, the number of coronavirus cases has reached over 10,500 after another 742 infections were reported in the past 24 hours. The health officials say 15 more people died since yesterday, bringing the death toll to 224. In the last 24 hours, the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province recorded the most number of cases with 83 infections. Officials say 2,337 patients have recovered from the disease so far. The medics said the ratio of locally transmitted cases has increased to 79%. Meanwhile, a Chinese drugs company has invited Pakistan's National Institute of Health to collaborate in conducting clinical trials of its vaccine in the country. The NIH official said a successful clinical trial in Pakistan will make it one of the first few countries for the launch of a COVID-19 vaccine. In another news, Pakistan has strongly condemned the escalating systematic campaign of demonizing Muslims in India. Foreign Office spokesperson Aisha Farooqi says Muslims in India are facing increased exclusion as well as the threat of mob violence. In her weekly press briefing in Islamabad, Aisha Farooqi criticized government's RSS-inspired anti-Muslim policies. She said it is deeply disconcerting that the already persecuted and marginalized Muslims in India are becoming insecure amid COVID-19 outbreak. Talking about Indian-occupied Kashmir, Farooqi said Pakistan is concerned about increasing persecution of journalists in the valley. She pointed out that it is 263rd day of the continued Indian oppression and communications blackout in occupied Kashmir. Farooqi also said a video conference of SAARC member states proposed by Pakistan is being held to discuss the COVID-19 pandemic. The US and Qatar have agreed on the importance of reduction in violence by the Taliban for peace in Afghanistan. In a statement, the White House said US President Donald Trump and Qatari Emir Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani held a phone call. It said the two leaders also agreed on the importance of continuing talks on prisoner releases in Afghanistan. The statement said President Trump thanked the Qatari Emir for playing a key role in the Doha agreement with the Taliban. It said Trump urged for an end to regional divisions in the Persian Gulf. Trump encouraged Al-Thani to take steps toward resolving the Gulf rift in order to work together to defeat COVID-19. The two leaders called for action to minimize the impact of the pandemic on the world economy. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says Iran must be held accountable for launching the country's first military satellite into orbit. In a press conference, he said Iran's military, designated as a terrorist organization by the U.S., is behind the launch. Pompeo said every nation has an obligation to go to UN and evaluate if this launch was consistent with the UNSC resolutions. He said Washington has offered Tehran humanitarian assistance, but that offer was rejected. Pompeo said the U.S. also assisted other countries with delivering humanitarian aid to the Iranian people. Libya has accused Russian private military contractor WAGNER of carrying out a chemical attack in the country. Interior Minister Fatih Bagasha said WAGNER mercenaries used a nerve agent against the government forces in Tripoli. Bashaga said the government of National Accord is cooperating with the US, UK and Turkey to ensure stability in Libya. He said the government is trying to push its enemies out of artillery range of Tripoli after making advances in western battlefronts. The minister said driving Khalifa Haftar's forces out of the town of Farhuna can end Libya's civil war. He said there was no military solution to the conflict, but it was also not possible to negotiate with Haftar. Libya's UN-recognized government has made major gains against the Eastern Army during the past weeks. The guarantor states of ASTANA process have reaffirmed their commitment to Syria's territorial integrity and political unity. The foreign ministers of Turkey, Russia and Iran held the 7th meeting on the latest situation in Syria via video conference. In a statement, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said the fight against COVID-19 pandemic, developments on the ground and political process were discussed. It said the foreign ministers also shared thoughts on humanitarian situation and return of refugees. Turkish Foreign Minister W.H.O emphasized the need for continuation of aid towards Syria via Turkey. He said the Idlib ceasefire agreement must be followed to ensure peace in the region. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said the meeting stressed to find a political solution to the crisis in Syria and fighting terrorism. In Iraq, hundreds of civil servants staged a protest in the Kurdish city of Suleimania, demanding overdue wages. The protesters took to the streets after coronavirus-related movement restrictions were lifted. A protesting teacher said they have gathered here paying no heed to the virus but are afraid of starving to death. Last week, authorities eased lockdown measures in Iraq's semi-autonomous Kurdistan region, allowing essential businesses to open. However, large public gatherings are still not allowed. The Kurdistan region in northern Iraq has recorded over 300 COVID-19 cases, with 4 deaths and nearly 300 recoveries. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas says he will cancel all agreements with the US and Israel if Tel Aviv annexes land in the occupied West Bank. In a televised speech, he said Palestine will not stay silent if any part of its land is annexed. This comes after US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said the decision to annex West Bank rests with Israel. Pompeo said Washington will offer its views on this to the new Israeli government in private. He also welcomed the signing of a coalition deal between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Benny Gantz. Before signing the deal, Netanyahu and Gantz agreed to bring the vote on West Bank annexation to the Knesset starting July. Israeli settlement activity is widely considered illegal as per international laws. Another session of the contact group on Ukrainian settlement for improvements in the Donbas region has failed. Speaking after the meeting, Russia's envoy Boris Gryzlov said the contact group held a video conference producing no result. Gryzlov said no agreements between Kiev and Donbas were achieved due to Ukraine's non-constructive attitude. He said the situation has been particularly difficult in the contact group's political and security subgroups. The Russian envoy said along the contact line separating Kiev and Donbas, ceasefire violations are registered on a daily basis. He said Kiev is undermining a real opportunity to improve the situation in the region. Earlier, in an interview, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he will resolve the Donbas conflict before his presidential term expires. 5 people have died, while over a dozen are injured as severe storms rip through the southern American states of Oklahoma and Texas. Rescue officials said 3 people died in the Texan city of Unalaska, while the other 2 were killed in southern Oklahoma. County officials in Texas said there was significant damage to residential, commercial, and public infrastructure. Officials said crews will start to canvass the path of the tornado to further assess the damage. The National Weather Service had timely issued a tornado warning for several southeast Oklahoma counties. Authorities in Oklahoma say the timely warning saved a lot of lives. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. The WHO has warned world leaders that the coronavirus will be around for a long time. Speaking in Geneva, the WHO chief stressed the need to be cautious as most countries are still in the early stages of their epidemics. Coronavirus cases continue to surge in parts of the world. The World Health Organization has warned the outbreak is here to stay. WHO Chief Tedros Ghebreyesus insisted that the outbreak was declared a global emergency at the right time. He said all nations should exercise extreme caution while reopening their borders when the pandemic begins to subside. Ghebreyesus said, although some countries see a decline in COVID-19 infections, the concern of resurgence still exists.
Most countries are still in the early stages of their epidemics, and some that were affected early in the pandemic are now starting to see a resurgence in cases. Make no mistake, we have a long way to go. This virus will be with us for a long time.
The WHO chief said he hopes the US will reconsider its suspension of funding, but Ghebreyesus said his main focus was on ending the pandemic and saving lives. He said the financial support for the WHO and its efforts worldwide is important for the own safety of the US.
For US to remain safe, the investment in other countries is very important. It's not just important for other countries, it is important for other countries that US supports, but at the same time, it's important for the US itself. So I hope the freezing of the funding will be reconsidered.
The global health body says it will keep investigating the animal origin of the coronavirus in cooperation with its partners. The body said it is important to understand where the virus came from to know how to prevent it in the future. Germany says it is still at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic and will have to live with it for a long time. Addressing the lower house of parliament, Chancellor Angela Merkel said Germany has won time and it is being used well to bolster the healthcare system. Calling the World Health Organization an indispensable partner, Merkel said Germany will continue to support the body's mandate. She said a vaccine for coronavirus must be affordable and available to everyone around the globe. Talking about the EU, Merkel said all efforts at national level can only be successful if Europe acts together. She said Germany will be ready to pay much more into the European Union budget for an economic program aimed at supporting an upswing in the next 2 years. The US says China must permanently close its wildlife wet markets, holding them responsible for the new coronavirus pandemic. The new coronavirus is believed to have emerged in a market in the central Chinese city of Wuhan late last year. In a statement, US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said there is a strong link between illegal wildlife and zoonotic diseases. America's allies, including France, have been echoing the Trump administration's sentiments. Australia has also called for the G20 countries to take action on wildlife wet markets, calling them a biosecurity and human health risk. Canberra said it is not yet calling for a ban, but says its own advisors believe they may need to be phased out. Brazil's newly appointed health minister, Nelson Teich, says the country cannot survive under a long-term lockdown. Teich replaced Luiz Henrique Mandetta, who was fired by President Jair Bolsonaro over repeated disagreements regarding coronavirus containment strategy. Several weeks into the outbreak, Latin America has toughened up the response to the deadly pandemic. This report will tell you more.
Nations across the South American continent have taken drastic measures to combat the novel coronavirus as it threatens health and economy. While President Bolsonaro continues to downplay the pandemic threat, Brazil's state's authorities remain cautious about easing lockdown measures. Sao Paulo's Governor João Doria plans to gradually reopen from May 11th by relaxing some social distancing measures. Health Minister Teich also offered federal support to the governors, saying it was up to the states to do what is right for their region.
Gigante heterogêneo.
Brazil is huge and diverse. For things to be customized for different parts of the country, for different states and different regions, you have to take into account the number of new cases that could arise. Consider previous cases, the amount of hospital beds, what percentage of them are being used. The human resources angle, what has to be planned. One thing that is important is working between the health ministry, the states and municipalities. We can help precisely in this area of adapting, adjusting and calculating.
E uma coisa importante.
Meanwhile, Mexico has announced an increase in public spending of over $25 billion after showing restraint during the first weeks of the crisis. Chilean authorities have installed thermal imaging systems in hospitals to identify and treat employees early for potential infections. In Bolivia, doctors and nurses at El Alto's General Hospital protested over a lack of PPEs and medical supplies, including body bags for the dead.
We have a coronavirus death from this morning, which requires 2 bags to protect the cadaver and prevent the infection from spreading. We don't have body bags, the infection is spreading, and we continue to move around in here. We can't be asking for body bags every time someone dies. Going to the ministry and asking for bags, we can't do that. And now they're saying there are only 100 bags. What is the ministry preparing for?
In Uruguay, authorities have reopened 300 schools in the rural regions after a month-long closure, but the student attendance remains voluntary.
In the US, stay-at-home orders caused by COVID-19 pandemic have threatened livelihood and lifestyle of millions of people. Where some people have opted to protest against lockdowns, others have come up with innovative ways to get through the hard times. Let's find out more about this in this report.
In New Orleans, when a pedicab operator and a street violinist realized about 5 weeks ago that they were at a loss due to lockdown, they took their show on the road to express themselves and also make some money in the form of tips. Their mobile music box is a rolling concert that wins its way through neighborhoods.
There hasn't been too much of a plan outside of, we gotta go out and do this. If we make money, awesome, because, that helps, certainly, but, I think it was something that was definitely born out of love and probably has a bit of a life of its own. So there's no real plan except just to keep doing it and to be honest and to keep showing up and seeing what it is that's needed.
In a city that typically throbs with live music, shuttered bars and the pin-drop quiet quarter have created a void. Strict limits on gatherings have cancelled concerts, second-line parades, and the Jazz and Heritage Festival. In such a time, locals say this small music activity breaks the monotony and is very uplifting.
It's amazing and uplifting, and live music is what we miss most right now, and it's it brings everyone out and makes everyone feel like it's a beautiful day again.
Rosnoska and Grant try to pick a route each day. They go out to hit neighborhoods they haven't been to in a while. They accept tips, but more so the good vibes coming their way, and they also live stream their rides on Facebook.
German car manufacturer Mercedes-Benz has resumed engine production at its plant near Stuttgart city. The decision was taken after the government eased lockdown measures amid signs that Europe's largest economy is returning to normal. Daimler, the parent company of Mercedes-Benz, is gradually opening its plants in Europe. Speaking in Stuttgart, company's vice president Frank Dice said employees are required to wear face masks. He said the company had closed for a month lockdown and will increase production volume steadily. Dice and Daimler have spread out shifts so that the workers can no longer run into each other. Earlier, Germany approved the first clinical trials of a COVID-19 vaccine on humans. European stocks have paused as the data reveal the coronavirus lockdowns are causing unprecedented pain to the continent's services sector. The stocks Europe 600 SXXP edged to 0.1%. Germany's DAX index decreased 0.7%. Earlier, stocks in Asia traded marginally higher as oil prices continue their overnight rebound, recovering same recent losses. Japan's Nikkei 225 has risen almost 1%, while the Topix index gained. Hong Kong's Hang Seng also rose by over 0.5%. South Korea's Kospi has also edged 1% higher. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.